it's incredible at how much technology we have in our pockets day to day. I think when IBM made the first 1 gigabyte storage, right? It was like the size of a refrigerator. Probably took a ton of power to run, and I can plug in my phone overnight. It's going to be charged all day, and it has 256 gigabytes, and that's a cheap version from years ago.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Tech4UsAll, the podcast that helps make sense out of technology, keeping it simple, approachable. You're not your enemy, your ally. Whether you're tech adverse, anxious, or just hesitant to embrace it, which is okay and understandable, we're here to show you technology isn't as daunting as it seems. Each episode, we unpack everyday technologies with experts from around the world, breaking it all down to plain English to help you feel confident and in control. The more comfortable you feel with the technology in your life, the better you'll be able to use it and keep yourself safe and protected. So there's a lot to be gained by that, but we understand that it can be a lot, so we're going to make it simple. I'm your host, Scott Saldinger, and I look forward to introducing you to new great guests every single week. And this is no different. Today, we got Jonathan Hale. He's a cybersecurity analyst and a lifelong learner in cybersecurity. And today we're going to talk mobile security. So, Jonathan, welcome to Tech for Us All.
Hey, thank you so much for having me, Scott. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. I'm excited for today's discussion because mobile security is kind of a moving target, right? So, but let's kind of start with your technology background. What experience do you bring on the cybersecurity side?
Absolutely. So used to be in the Army, did a lot of tech stuff there, especially because I had a clearance back then. I used to work for an insurance corporation at the time, and the career was not meeting my needs. I got really into digitizing my parents' old home videos. So, those old tape, the 8 millimeters, put those on a DVD, put those on a USB drive, and plugged them into network attached storage. And that was my foray into the world of technology. Since then, I got several cybersecurity certifications, and hopped into NetSuite consulting with enterprise resource planning, and then moved over into the cybersecurity realm. And I've been helping healthcare organizations, so hospitals, small outpatient clinics with their IT needs and IT security needs for years now.
Wow. All right. That's pretty cool. And I really like that the story of you were digitizing your parents' films, and that gave you your foray because that's kind of like, kind of a soft launch into this, right? You weren't expecting to build those skills. So you were doing one thing without the
Yeah.
experience of doing it, and you just tried. And I think that speaks to what we're trying to do here with Tech for Us All. Nothing is that daunting. Nothing can be broken permanently in technology. It can all be fixed. You just got to try, be a little inquisitive, and take a few steps in the right direction. Um, so I'm curious, and this is kind of a general question I like to ask people, but what are your thoughts behind why people tend to be a little technology resistant or hesitant to embrace it?
I think it's probably a combination of factors. There's a legacy of maybe intimidation there, but there are so many people that are willing to help. If you just put something out on the forum or hop onto a social media post and say, "Hey, I'm having trouble with this. I'm new." Usually there are a surprising number of people that are willing to mentor and take you under their wing. It's also kind of frustrating. The older that I've gotten, which, Lord, thankfully I'm not that old yet, but the older I've gotten, the more I've noticed there's an unwillingness for me to engage because you've seen so much of it now, right? You've seen the latest and greatest, and the latest and greatest is no longer the latest and greatest, right? When I was young, I really liked playing video games, and the older I've gotten, the less enthusiastic I've become, not because they're not entertaining, but, I just don't have the time, or I don't have the willingness to engage. It's not as new, right? It's not as new and interesting anymore. And every time you're opening up a new user interface, you get a new phone, you have to understand what all the apps are, where they live, what they do, or you get a new laptop. And if you've ever been assigned a new laptop at work, you know how frustrating that can be and how much of your hours and the time at work it takes up trying to learn that stuff. So I think part of it feels like a chore, and part of it is it can be intimidating. And those two is a strong 1-2 punch in my opinion.
Oh, no, absolutely. I mean, I can't tell you the number of times when I've had to do a technology refresh for work, and I'm like, yeah, but I can't get the information from one to another. It's not going to be the
Yeah,
same. And I think we as human creatures are resistant to change. Everybody a little different, or for whatever reason, we all have kind of our sweet spot. And you get a piece of technology set up the way you like it, and you're moving along, and then somebody upends the apple cart, and you're like, oh, I got to learn, I got to change.
happens
I mean,
again. Yeah,
I think to getting my parents from being Windows people to Mac people, just so it was easier on me
yeah,
to fix their technology. So I totally get where you're talking, where you're coming from. So I want to really dive into this mobile security stuff, because mobile does come at us on a consumer side really fast and furious, right?
yeah.
But I know people who are like, yeah, they're 6 or 7 versions behind, or they don't use, the simple tools just to keep people out of their device. Like what are things in the mobile security world that people just who are lay people can just think about a little bit more and try to incorporate in their lives?
Yeah, and just a tangent right there at the beginning. It's incredible at how much technology we have in our pockets day to day. I think when IBM made the first 1 gigabyte storage, right, it was like the size of a refrigerator. Probably took a ton of power to run, and I can plug in my phone overnight. It's going to be charged all day, and it has 256 gigabytes, and that's a cheap version from years ago. Um, so it's really incredible. Our phones are, PCs with a lot of storage built in, a camera built in, cell service and internet built in. Like assuming you pay your bill, Bluetooth built in, and we carry it around with us all the time. And it's a constant data hog. It generates data and it eats up data. Uh, so when we're carrying around our phone every single day, probably the best place to start is what apps do we use, right? So these are the tools that I don't know, we might play a game on it. We might interact with social media on it. And I think probably the most approachable way to do that is hop into your settings. What permissions do those apps use? If you had to factory reset your phone, if you had to get a completely new phone, you couldn't port in any old information, what would you be missing? Right? Are there any apps that you downloaded in 2018 and you haven't used that since? Um, just be conscious. Like for Facebook, for example, you don't really need an app to use that. You can hop on Safari, you can hop on Chrome. These are things that we don't necessarily need a whole app for, but an app generates so much more data and so much more. It's going to ask you for a lot more than just a web browser would. And a lot of times that's what an app is. It's a fancy browser. It's going to take you to the same place that you would go if you hopped on your computer and you opened up Google or you opened up Safari or whatever you use. And I think that's a pretty easy way for people to take stock of what you actually use every single day.
Let's talk about that a little bit, because a lot of times when you download an app, whether you're an Android or Apple, people give permission blindly.
Yeah, I mean, you want it to work, right? It's like agreeing to the terms and conditions. You just see a little thing up that pops up, and you want to hit yes, you want to hit okay because you want to get to the part where the app is doing what you want it to do, right?
Right.
It's
Yeah.
yeah,
And then you hear the story, people are like, well, I think my phone is listening. Well, it really is, actually. And
yeah,
that's good and bad,
yeah,
right? It's good and bad. It's not necessarily part of being an enemy to you, but if you're not cognizant of what permissions do and what they offer the developer of the app, you can potentially be setting yourself up for either it knowing things that you don't want it to know, or
mhm,
giving away things that are important to you that you wouldn't just give to a stranger on the street.
right. And a lot of times when we're putting in information, when we're typing out a post, or when we're even searching something on the web, you're talking to a stranger. You're talking to some guy on the street and asking him or her for directions. But you don't always want to go up to a stranger on the street and say, "Hey, what's the best place for me to get, I don't know, pregnancy care products or something like that?" They don't need to know that. Um, so I think application permission review and application just use review in general might be a good place to start. Another good place to start, I would say, is look at your settings app. Your settings app is probably the most worthwhile app on your phone that you could sit there and get to know. Like spend a couple hours with it. look at everything, look at all the options, drill down into it. The more you know about your settings, the more you're going to know about your phone. And while you're there, take the time to update your phone. If if it's okay with you, if you're not doing anything super heavy or super technical, just set it up to automatically update. Um, they're not really publishing updates to inconvenience you. They're publishing updates to protect you because they don't want lawsuits on their hands or anything, and you want to keep your phone safe. Just a couple of versions ago, uh, sorry, this is a little bit in the weeds, but the what is it? The triangulation attack with iOS, where they could send you a link in a text message, and you wouldn't even have to open the text message because it would pre-render the web page that it's linked to, and then there would be some malicious content in there, and then that would start siphoning stuff from your phone, like what the camera input is, where you're located, microphone input, stuff like that. That was like what, iOS 15. Again, just a couple of versions ago. So it's really worth updating your phone regularly and updating your apps regularly. It makes them work better at the very least, and it makes them more secure.
Yeah, I mean, the whole key is I think the more comfortable you are with the idea of keeping your phone up to date. And let's be honest, everybody out there watching, raise your hand. You have that family member who, when you look at their phone, they have 30,000 unread emails. They're 7 versions back. Um, all of those things, and that not paying attention to those introduces unnecessary risk that those people who are trying to attack just the general population are looking to take advantage of, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of, yeah, unread notifications, probably the most frequent vector that I see in my own phone, as well as so many others, is people either replying to or engaging with unsolicited text messages or calls. You see that text from an unknown phone number, and it has some weird link in it, and it says, "Hey, we're USPS," at a non-USPS website address. They're saying, "Click on this link. We lost your package. We need to refund you money." Were you expecting that text? Right? Were you? Did you have a package that they lost? If it's not a number that you know, it's best not to engage at all. And if you think it's malicious, then usually your telecom provider, whether that's Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, they will have a spam line or some sort of app set up to where you can even report text messages and calls, and that helps them to crack down on it.
Do you think, because that's almost in line with, pig butchering, which is, the romance scams where people are just trying to be your friend and build a relationship and take advantage of you emotionally. Do you think one of the biggest risks out there is that because mobile devices have brought us into this world of immediacy, that we are too quick to react and too slow to question?
Yeah, I think so. There is an immediacy that's baked into every single scam. That's one of the biggest red flags. But also, if you just take a second and sit there and ask yourself, do I need to respond to this right now? Like, what's the worst case scenario if I don't answer the phone call and they don't leave a voicemail? Well, chances are they probably weren't anyone that was legitimately trying to reach you in the first place. If they were legit, they'd leave you a voicemail, and then you could determine for yourself in a low pressure environment whether that's legit. That immediacy is baked into our culture, like you mentioned, like with fast food, good microwave your leftovers, and um, everything is kind of at the touch of a button, but it doesn't need to be. They have scams out there that are really sophisticated, where they would get a voice sample from maybe your grandson or your uncle or your brother from social media. Like, they'll take a video from Instagram or from Facebook and use that to generate an AI kind of version of them saying, "Hey, I'm calling you from jail. I need some bail money." Okay, worst case scenario, you hang up, you go ahead and call your niece or nephew, or even call their parents and say, "Hey, is this legit? Are they actually in jail?" Worst case scenario, they're in jail for 5 more minutes while you figure it out. And if it's coming from someone you think think about how can you be sure, right? Go ahead and call a number that you know to be legitimate. Call a person that you know to be legitimate. If you weren't expecting that email, if you weren't expecting that text, follow up in a different channel. and make sure that um, they are who they say they are.
Let's talk about another piece of mobile security I don't think a lot of people think about. Is hopping on an unknown Wi-Fi network. What are some of the risks there? If you go to, I don't know, I'm not going to name any brands, but let's say you go to a coffee shop and there are 10 different open networks that you could hop onto. What are some of the dangers there, and what are some things that people can do if you hop onto, let's say, what's commonly called a man in the middle scenario?
Yeah, I think in the interim between when this was a really big issue in 2017, 2016, and now they've implemented some protections in how you web browse and how you enter your credentials that have mitigated this to some extent. But in general, you never want to hop on a Wi-Fi that you don't really know. And if you're on your cell phone, it's really frustrating. You don't need to. That's the thing. You have data built in. And most people nowadays have either a really high cap or an unlimited data plan where you can sit on your phone and never have to connect to Wi-Fi, only in very few situations. And sorry, just to go back into what you're saying, when you are on someone else's Wi-Fi, assuming they have proper permissions, or even if they don't, they can sit there and listen to your traffic. And sometimes your traffic is encrypted and they might not get a whole lot out of it. But if the app that you're using or the communication that you're using isn't that secure, they can get a lot out of it. And this is a weird conversation to be having in the immediate aftermath of, or the immediate revelations of the US telecom hacks. So when we're talking about using SMS, unencrypted plain text communications, it's not just someone on that Wi-Fi that might be listening. It's someone that has a backdoor into your internet service provider or your telephone provider that might be listening, and it's kind of concerning.
Let's kind of define what listening means, because some people may just think it's somebody with a headset on actually listening to data, right? So let's define that, and then what are the types of things that when these people are listening, they can learn about you that they can then be used against you.
And typically, what I see is people trying to steal um, your credentials, and that's either listening to you logging into your bank, quote unquote listening, and then acting as if they are you, and that's a session steal. Or if it's really unsecured, then they might be able to look at your password in plain text, which hopefully is rare nowadays, but it's still possible, especially if you haven't updated your router software or the version of Wi-Fi that you're using. Um, like I mentioned at the top, there have been mitigating practices, but most of the time, what I see is it involves credential theft, or at least getting a sense of what you're communicating with and what kind of traffic that is.
What are some of the things that you see proactively coming down the pipe that are new, either types of attacks or scams that people should be looking out for? And what are some of the indicators so they're just cognizant of this doesn't seem right? Because if you're already tech adverse, you probably don't have your radar up or your antennas up for what those other things could be that could be trying to take advantage of you.
I think, well, part of it is some of the social engineering schemes that I mentioned earlier, but people are using AI in all sorts of ways to generate fake images, fake bodies of text, fake voice recordings, and they're using that to mass market phishing scams or social engineering scams where they're acting like someone they're acting like a business that and what they're doing with that is usually trying to get your money. And I don't want to say be paranoid, but it's a pretty crazy world that we live in today, and I, I would say be wary, right?
Well, can we maybe turn that into being prepared, right? Preparation is the greatest defense, right?
Yeah,
Um, y-
it's well overall security tips. I would say it's like outrunning a bear, right? You don't want to be the slowest or easiest to catch because most of the time they're just looking for an easy mark. Um, it's when I was playing baseball. and we would going through practice. They would go through scenarios like, what if the ball is hit to my right? I'm going to cover second base and try to make a double play. Or if the ball is hit to my left, I'm going to make sure to try to stop that or act as an interim. When you're going about um, when you're going about your daily practice on the internet or sifting through email or even just using your phone, think about what would happen if you got locked out of your phone. What if you lost your phone? Do you have a password on it? That would be a good check. Do you have lockdown mode enabled in iOS to be able to track your phone and then make sure that your iCloud accounts can't get compromised? When you're using Android and you want to download this app, but it's not really coming from the Google Play Store or it's not reputable, right? It's think about the consequences of that or the permissions that you're enabling there. So it's an adage that I would say is like play baseball in the sense of always be thinking about what would I do in this situation and just have an immediate response there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a reason there are app stores both on Android and Apple. They, to the best of their ability, because nothing's perfect, will do everything they can to validate the authenticity. If you are in Android land and you are downloading apps that don't come from their Play Store, which they are less regulated in how they decide what goes on their store than Apple per se, you're really taking a big risk because you're letting someone into your device that no one's even validated. It's like hiring a babysitter to watch your kids that you didn't interview. Is that a
Yeah,
good analogy?
that's a very good analogy. It side loading apps for most people, unless you know the developer, you shouldn't be doing it. I would say it's that risky. Um, you would need to have some sort of a way to vet that person offline that made the app. Otherwise, most of the time, it's going to be a use case that you can cover with a legitimate app in the Play Store. And while you're at it, if you're on an Android and you use the Play Store, make sure that Google Play Protect for apps is enabled. It should be enabled by default, but just using that and using reputable apps would go a long way towards deterring just easy risk.
So let's kind of recap what we've been talking about. Make sure I understand it because I'm a simple guy, and hopefully our viewers understand it. Is number one, when we get a new phone, or even today, looking at our phone, looking at the access that we provide to these apps, we should consider not using an app if there's a browser version available because we give away less information that way. We should use apps that are trusted and protected through the providers that we have, because we are taking a big risk by using ones that we're not. And then taking seriously the idea of updating our devices because the developers of those devices are are doing their best to stay step ahead so that we're not leaving ourselves vulnerable by not updating.
Absolutely. And if you're on Apple, it's a little bit easier, right? Because the manufacturer is the OS developer. But if you're on Android, make sure that you're taking in the manufacturer updates as well as the operating system updates. Update to the Android, update to the phone itself. A couple of other tips that I would put forth is when you're using um, password and username, set up multi-factor authentication. That's usually any multi-factor authentication is better than none. And there are some that's better than others. If you want to get in the weeds, you can get a hardware token YubiKey. You can set up FIDO passkeys, but even an SMS text, wall flawed, goes a long way above just username password. It's just another way that someone could verify that you are who you say that you are, and the bad guy is not.
Now, yes or no, this is a red flag. If you get an SMS text to validate for multi-factor, but you did not request it, is that a red flag?
Absolutely. Although I get them all the time. It's usually when my wife is logging into our bank and she needs it from me. But 99.999% of the time, it is a red flag. And I've gotten those before. And my first reaction is to go onto that site, separately, and make sure that I'm not getting anything from them. And then I check my email. And if it's a red flag, I immediately go to the support. And I say, hey, can you please look into this? and log in legitimately and go ahead and change my password. Um, Most of the time, it had turned out to be my wife, but there are a couple of cases where someone had stolen my password, and I'm really glad I had it.
Well, and yeah, I mean, look, the companies that we work with in our lives do the best that they can, but we are part of that as consumers as well. I just recently had a rental car, right? Here in North Texas, we have toll tags. Around the country, people use toll tags now, right? And when you get a rental, you have to either transfer your tag temporarily or you are using a third party. And I got this random text from the North Texas Tollway Association about a charge that I didn't recognize. What did I do? Did I click that link? Absolutely not. Did I call them? Yes. Did it take me a little time? Yes. But I was able to validate that that was a scam and that I should have done nothing with it. So, anything that you don't ask for that shows up on your mobile device, you have to question it. You have to ask yourself some questions. So, those are tips that I think are really good that'll keep people at least beginning to get safer, right? And it's just one or two. If you take one or two little things away from our conversation today, you're going to increase exponentially the ability for you to protect yourself and not worry about things as much. So, Jonathan, this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate you joining me. Everybody, we're going to have show notes below. We'll have additional tips that you can look at. Don't be afraid of technology. Embrace it. Learn it. Learn even the basics, and you're better off than knowing nothing because just a little protection goes a long way. And that's what we're here to do, is to help you become more comfortable. So thanks so much, Jonathan, for joining me. Thanks, everybody, for watching Tech for Us All. And we'll be back with another engaging topic soon. Thanks so much.